Donald Trump's national security advisor pulling no punches, John Bolton telling conservative legal scholars in Washington that his administration would go so far as to sanction the International Criminal Court if it went ahead with probes of alleged U.S. human rights violations in places like Afghanistan.
The United States will use any means necessary to protect our citizens and those of our allies from unjust prosecution by this illegitimate court. We will not cooperate with the Icc. We will provide no assistance to the Icc, and we certainly will not join the Icc. We will let the Icc die on its own. After all, for all intents and purposes, the Icc is already dead to us.
Now, Bolton's no stranger to standoffs with international institutions. As George W. Bush's United Nations ambassador, he consistently blasted the UN. In the end, he proved too hawkish, even for Bush. Now he's back under our president, who disdains multilateral bodies and treaties, Donald Trump, who's walked away from the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal, the Paris Climate Change Agreement, and has even threatened to quit the World Trade Organization. The United States, let's recall, is not a member of the ICC, so what impact will all this have on the court? Will it further undermine a jurisdiction accused by some of racism? 11 of its 12 current cases target wrongdoing in Africa. Or will it stir a reaction and embolden the Hague-based ICC to go after big players, not just failed states? In a word, what future for international justice? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Trump versus the ICC. Joining us from Amsterdam, he was the International Criminal Court's first prosecutor when it was founded, Argentinian human rights lawyer Luis Moreno Ocampo. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Paris attorney Samia Maktouf.
It's a crucial debate, what you present.
It is indeed. It's Paris attorney Samia Maktouf works as a counsel before the International Criminal Court. Welcome to the show.
Thank
you. Joining us from Bloomington, Indiana, David Linden Bosco, who teaches at the University of Indiana, the author of Rough Justice, the International Criminal Court in a World of Power Politics. Thank you for being with us.
Good to be with you. Thanks.
And from Alexandria, Virginia, he teaches at American University in Washington. Chris Rudolph, the author of Power and Principle, The Politics of International Criminal Courts. The France 24 debate on Facebook and on Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. Yet 2 decades after the signing of the Rome Statute that laid the foundation for the ICC, many wonder if Monday's speech in Washington might prove a seminal moment for the court. Luke Schrago breaks down for us just what is the International Criminal Court.
It symbolized hope around the world in the face of the worst state-level abuse the planet had to offer. Today, though, the International Criminal Court finds itself under threat from a nation that calls itself a paragon of freedom, the United States. The Statute of Rome marked the global body's creation on the 17th of July 1998, before it entered into force 4 years later, with a remit to judge crimes against humanity, genocide and war crimes. It could only go after individuals, though, if they were from a nation which ratified the statute, 123 in all, or if a crime was found to be committed in one. Over the last 2 decades, the ICC has handled 26 cases and issued 32 arrest warrants from its offices in The Hague. Of those, 6 have led to prison sentences, including former Ivorian and Liberian presidents Laurent Gbagbo and Charles Taylor. The ICC has often faced criticism, though, in particular that it targets specific nations. 10 of its 11 current cases are looking into matters in Africa. Elsewhere, the courts come under fire for an inability to make charges stick, most recently of crimes against humanity, against former Congolese Vice President Jean-Pierre Bemba. The last few years have also seen several states threaten to withdraw. Targeted with investigation over alleged crimes against humanity, Burundi was the first to put its threats into action in October 2017. Other nations never signed up in the first place. The ICC has often found itself powerless to investigate certain crimes with the absence of major powers like Russia, China, or the United States. In 2014, for example, both Russia and China blocked a case looking at war crimes in Syria from being referred to the court. The United States, too's always given privilege to its own constitution over the laws of the ICC, with Washington vowing to do whatever it takes to protect its citizens from any investigation, including 1.7 million allegations of war crimes in Afghanistan.
Whatever it takes. Luis Moreno Ocampo, what was your reaction when you heard John Bolton speak?
He's authentic. He believed that's the way for him to protect his country. I believe the big mistake is he considered it's unjustifiable and unfounded that the investigation on torture in Afghanistan. And that is not true. The tortures were committed in Afghanistan. That is confirmed by the U.S. Senate. So the question is, can U.S. torture people outside and nothing happen? In this case, ICC is going to investigate because Afghanistan, a sovereign state, decided to be part of the ICC. So it's not ICC abusing. So the problem is, and the real issue here is, what kind of order are we going to establish in the world? That big countries like US can torture outside and it's fine? Or we'll establish a system that no one can torture, no one can kill? That is it. That ICC is no one can torture, no one can kill. Bolton is proposing we can torture to protect our country. And that's a real debate. Can the US torture to protect its country and the rest of the world say nothing? That's, for me, the key issue. That's the proposal of Mr. Bolton. And that, I think, is the debate.
Chris Rudolph, do you agree that the ICC does have the right to investigate claims of torture in Afghanistan?
From a legal standpoint, it absolutely does. I think it probably also does from a moral standpoint as well. I think the tricky thing for the ICC is that it doesn't just operate solely within the idealistic realm of the law, but it also really has to negotiate some really treacherous politics that are just inherent in international society. So there is kind of where the gist of the problem is for the ICC, is that it can't just pursue, pure idealism, that it still has to navigate international politics if it wants to be effective as an institution.
You agree with that, David Linden Bosco, that it's about navigating politics, even though there's allegations there of torture?
Well, there are important choices that the prosecutor has to make, and some of those choices are based on discretion. So, for example, in Afghanistan, most of what the ICC is looking at is criminality by the Taliban, by other extremist groups, some by the Afghan government. The U.S. part of it is a relatively small part of the overall file, if you will, in Afghanistan. And so the prosecutor made a decision to include this, and also a decision not just to investigate in Afghanistan, but they've added to that investigation allegations of torture at several black sites, so-called black sites in Eastern and Central Europe. So they've kind of gone beyond the territorial situation in Afghanistan. I mean, as Chris Rudolph said, there are some real choices here that the ICC needs to make about what it's going to do and how it's going to interpret its mandate. And the judges, of course, are going to be the ones who decide whether to authorize an investigation. And that's a decision that should be coming, I would expect, very soon in the next days or weeks.
Samia Maktouf, do statements like that of John Bolton, do they influence the judges? Do they weigh on their decision of whether or not they pursue the probe and how they pursue it?
Hope not. And
but what's your experience on this?
Yes, first of all, I would say that, yes, the ICC is a political court by birth, I would say. And
how so? A political court?
Because, unfortunately, since the ICC starts investigations, we know. And all the former prosecutors, we're talking with one of them, knows that. And maybe I should point what happened recently on the case of Jean-Pierre Bemba, who, because the case of
former Congolese warlord,
yes,
former vice president.
It may be regarded as a failure of the ICC. We know that he was retained for 10 years and finally found innocent. Laurent Gbagbo, the former president of Ivory Coast, was there since 2011, and probably he may be freed after the trial if we use the Bemba jurisprudence. So
on appeal.
Yes. Also, the warrant issued by the ICC against the president of the Sudanese president never. Let him saying at home. He
okay,
was,
but it's okay. So there's reversals.
All over the world, traveling.
So it has mixed fortunes on whether or not there's convictions. But how does that make it a political court? Explain that.
As a lawyer, and I used to sue some cases, it's unfortunately, and it's our deception. As a lawyer, when we ask the prosecutor to sue some people against the crime of crime against humanity made by ISIS, made by terrorists, and we give all evidence. When we, as I personally, filed the case in 2014 as a lawyer for Middle East Christians, and still till today, waiting for an answer, and nothing was investigated.
You think it's political pressure that means
I don't know.
I
don't have the answer, but I can understand that, unfortunately, the ICC is not used as a strong partner for African countries. It is, unfortunately, used as sort of, Amocles. It's not working, as a partner, is not helping those foreign countries, African foreign countries, to create, and to set up democracy in their country. That's why some of them, some African leaders, are afraid to leave the power because they don't want to be persecuted by ICC.
By the ICC. Luis Moreno Ocampo?
Look, the fact that there are acquittals is showing that the court is a court of law. And the question here is, the crimes investigated in Afghanistan are real crimes. David Bosco said rightly, there are three groups of crimes to be investigated. The vast majority are Taliban crimes. Then allegations against Afghanistan forces, but then serious allegations against CIA operations, torture. So the problem is not the ICC, the problem is Taliban are committing crimes, it's wrong. Afghanistan forces are committing crime, is wrong. American forces committing torture is right? That's the real question. That's the real question. The U.S. Senate confirmed the CIA was torturing Afghanistan. The U.S. President Obama confirmed that CIA was torturing Afghanistan. So the facts are there. That's why when Mr. Bolton called unjustifiable is wrong. Unfounded is wrong. Are totally founded even in the U.S. Senate. So the question here is, when the U.S. is committing crimes outside U.S., what should we do? Should we remain silent, or should we apply the same rule to the Taliban and the Afghan force? Investigate them. That's what the prosecutor is proposing. Just investigate the crimes. U.S. can still prosecute itself. U.S. can still manage legally. That's my advice. Don't put political pressure. Don't try to manage political pressure. Put a lawyer. Bemba had a good lawyer. At the end, got an acquittal. Put a lawyer.
All right. Since
there are crimes committed, should be investigated. That's the main idea.
Since last December, the ICC can now pursue so-called crimes of aggression. For the first time since the post-World War II Nuremberg and Tokyo trials, the court can hold leaders individually criminally responsible for waging what's called aggressive war. For Bolton, that's raising alarm bells.
The, quote, crime of aggression could become a pretext for politically motivated investigations. Was the mission of U.S. Navy SEALs that killed Osama bin Laden in Pakistan a crime of aggression? What about the U.S. coalition airstrikes in Syria to protect innocent children from chemical weapons? How about U.S. military exercises with allies and partners around the world? Or Israel's actions to defend itself on countless occasions?
David Linden Bosco, your thoughts on this?
Well, so Bolton here is pointing to a real issue, which is that for the first time, really since Nuremberg, we now have the crime of aggression as something that can be prosecuted. And there are real difficult decisions to make about what constitutes aggression. And is it anything, any use of force that doesn't comply fully with the UN Charter, or is it something different than that? So there are real judgment calls. But now Bolton here was quite deceptive, though, because he acted as if the United States and Israel and U.S. and Israeli officials could be prosecuted for aggression, when it is very clear, based on what has been negotiated, that non-member states, states that have chosen to not join the ICC, cannot be prosecuted for aggression. Now, that points to another issue, though, which is, if that's true for aggression, and if the ICC member states have decided that's true for aggression, why should that not be true for other crimes? Because the real issue in Afghanistan with the U.S. is the U.S. views it as illegitimate for a court that it did not join and a treaty that it did not sign for that court to exercise jurisdiction over its personnel. And that was deemed a serious enough concern with aggression that they decided to exclude non-member states from the ICC's jurisdiction.
And do you think it's semantics that the ICC has every right to charge U.S. servicemen for alleged acts of torture, of war crimes?
Well, I think as a policy matter, it would be much better for the ICC to focus on the nationals of states that have joined the ICC, where there's consent from the state that represents those nationals. That is what the ICC should be focusing on, and not trying to go after the nationals of states that have not joined the court. I think that's what was decided with aggression. I think that is a much better route, as Christopher Rudolph pointed out. I mean, kind of the politically and policy-wise for the court. And this is going to come up not just in Afghanistan, but it's going to come up in Palestine, where Israel, another state that has not joined the court, may in the future face the possibility of its nationals being called before a court that it doesn't recognize. And that's out of step with the way that international law has traditionally worked, which is that you are only bound by a treaty if you've joined it.
Luis Moreno Ocampo, as a prosecutor, you know that when you start a case, you want to be able to get a conviction at the end. Do you agree with David Lyndon Bosco that it's just not worth the effort going after citizens of a state that didn't sign on to that Rome Statute?
But the prosecutor has no option because it's the law. The law is different for crimes against humanity, war crime, genocide, than for aggression. David Bosco is totally right. Mr. Bolton is deceptive on the fact that aggression crime require both states in agreement. So U.S. in Pakistan would be no problem because neither Pakistan nor U.S. is member, so no chance of an investigation on Pakistan on aggression. Aggression requires both sides according with the law, with the Rome Statute. Torture requires just the country who ratified, which the territorial country. The problem is, if an American person commits a crime in Paris, France will investigate him. If an American person commits a crime in Afghanistan, Afghanistan can investigate it or can delegate to the ICC. The U.S. has a legal argument there because the U.S. signed an agreement with Afghanistan to protect its own people. That agreement was never presented to the ICC. So U.S. can use a lawyer again to present the agreement or ask Afghanistan to present the agreement to the judge and say, look, Afghanistan it made this agreement with the U.S. and please, you cannot do U.S. So there are legal issues here. The prosecutor cannot avoid the law. The prosecutor has to apply the law.
I'm going to interrupt you very briefly because we have to take a very short break, but we'll pick up on this point when we come back. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're reacting to Donald Trump's national security advisor threatening sanctions against members of the International Criminal Court if they pursue U.S. citizens, in particular over accusations of torture in Afghanistan. The U.S. not a signatory to the Rome Statute that regulates the ICC, not a member of the ICC. Neither are other major powers like China, Russia, India. With us to talk about it is the former prosecutor for the International Criminal Court, Luis Moreno Ocampo, who joins us from Amsterdam. Joining us from Alexandria, Virginia, Chris Rudolph, who teaches at American University and is the author of Power and Principle, The Politics of International Criminal Courts. From Bloomington, Indiana, David Linton Bosco, who teaches at the University of Indiana and is the author of Rough Justice, the International Criminal Court in a World of Power Politics. And here in the studio, we're joined by Samia Maktouf, a Franco-Tunisian attorney and counsel at the International Criminal Court. Thank you. Welcome back. Luis Moreno Ocampo, just once again, your argument is that the ICC should or could, if it should pursue cases against U.S. citizens.
The problem is the law. It's called law. The law say that torture are a crime. In the case of CIA in Afghanistan, even the U.S. Senate confirmed they were torturing people. And Afghanistan is a state party of the Rome Statute since 2003. Therefore, there is no reason not to do it. So for me, Mr. Bolton is presenting an opportunity for us. Because Mr. Bolton is saying we can torture people. And I believe it's wrong. I believe, Mr. Bolton believes it's good for U.S. citizens to defend themselves in any way, torturing or killing. I think that's wrong. I think it's not working well. So that for me, this discussion is about torture outside the U.S. is wrong. Killing outside the U.S. is wrong. U.S. is a country built on justice. So we need to expand justice around the world. And that should be a much better defense for U.S. Instead to torture and kill, organize a global justice system, a real justice system against terrorism, different than the ICC. Organize a global justice system against terrorism. That is the real proposal. Now, how we can accept that the U.S. can torture people in Afghanistan, and we say, okay, it's fine. Oh, it's fine. They can do it because they are big. I don't think we can say that. I think torture is wrong. David Bosco is right. Because Mr. Bolton is transforming the debate. Until now, the biggest crimes committed in Afghanistan were Taliban's. But now, Mr. Bolton transformed the torture of CIA in Afghanistan in the biggest issue. How the prosecutor could ignore now that crimes. How the judges could ignore that crimes. Law legally cannot do it. So now, Mr. Bolton put the U.S. in a difficult position. They need a lawyer, more lawyers, less political activism.
Chris Rudolph,
terror,
we're entering a new phase for globalization. The world is getting us to be a smaller place, much more interconnected, more trade deals are done internationally. A lot of times we're talking about criminal cases that go across national borders. You're listening to Luis Moreno Ocampo there talking about Americans acting as though they're above the law. What are your thoughts on the way the U.S. is going to be perceived after that speech on Monday?
Well, first of all, let me say that I was not surprised by Mr. Bolton's remarks, and he's had these same views for a long time, immediately after the Rome Conference that established the statute that created the ICC. He said many of the same types of things, and particularly now in his role with the Trump administration, it's also really consistent with the broader shift in U.S. foreign policy that, on the one hand, promotes American exceptionalism, and second, and I think for primarily a domestic political audience, has the tendency of creating enemies in different areas in order to consolidate a domestic political base. So I really think that Mr. Bolton's picking a fight, an old fight with the ICC, that really the ICC has no real interest in pursuing. The ICC I do not believe, wants to get into an ideological fight with the United States.
It's a fight that, in other words, the United States can win, just like the United States is imposing its law when it comes to the return of those Iran sanctions, forcing other foreign companies that do business in dollars to cut their ties with Tehran.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the tricky thing for the ICC is that as an international court, as opposed to a domestic court, it does not have a police force to execute its arrest warrants or, apprehend its defendants, and instead really relies on cooperation, both of member parties and also in a number of really important ways, the UN Security Council. So as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, it has very strong interests in maintaining cordial relations or positive relations with the United States. And conversely, I think the United States really has a lot to gain or conversely a lot to lose, depending on how antagonistic it wants to be about principles of justice as applied by the ICC, because the United States has always thought of itself as a principled nation and a leader in terms of things like human rights. So that would be very hypocritical of the United States to take these positions.
So, but you do have, and I'll put it to you, David Linden Bosco, you do have, on the one hand, you heard Luis Moreno Ocampo saying, hey, the law is the law. If there's a crime, you have to pursue it. On the other hand, you heard Chris Rudolph saying, well, the ICC doesn't have a police force, and the U.S. is a mighty power, and so this is a fight that's just not worth fighting for the International Criminal Court. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, as Luis Moreno Ocampo knows well, he's just saying the law is the law, but there's a lot of discretion. I mean, as he knows, when he was investigating cases, you don't investigate all criminality in a given situation. The ICC picks and chooses what it thinks are the most important cases out of a given situation, with most criminality not being covered. And the prosecutor here made a choice to include a relatively small number of cases of torture or alleged torture that, given the scale of the crimes that have been committed in Afghanistan, are really a drop in the bucket of the criminality in Afghanistan, and they've decided to select those. Now, maybe that's the right decision on the law, but the broader point here is, how do you build a functioning system of international justice? You have to have power and justice somehow aligned. And what I think the past several decades have shown is that when international justice is effective, as in the Balkans, it's when powerful states have decided they want to participate in a justice process and they can put their weight behind it. The ICC, as Christopher Rudolph said, is in a position where it's very detached from international power. Now, if one takes a totally idealistic view, that's fine. You just pursue the law wherever it goes and you say, to hell with the consequences. But I don't think, and I think the last 15 years of the ICC shows that you're not going to build a very effective system that way. And the ICC's arrest warrants are often unfulfilled. The ICC has suffered from serious legitimacy problems. I don't think we're building an effective international justice system the way the ICC is operating, and I don't see how a fight with the United States is going to aid it in that pursuit.
Samia Maktouf, you need that support of big, powerful states. Otherwise, you can't have international justice.
We don't have this heavy support. As the prosecutor, Luis Ocampo, said, law is law. And I would say that ICC must be the place for justice and for fair trial, which is unfortunately yet not.
But
today.
If the big powers like the US, Russia, China, India don't want it,
they don't join.
Then
will
it ever be effective?
They don't join because for them, ICC is a court, is a political weapon. it is used as a political weapon.
So what future for international justice? Will international justice get stronger or not?
Did not succeed to against the withdrawal of many African countries. You know, today many African countries are leaving the ICC. Why? So there is a problem. And recently, the Bemba case recently showed that there is a failure, and it is a failure of ICC because maybe we should say the law and the justice and fair trial in these institutions.
So, Luis Marinho Ocampo, you've been warned there, the ICC has been warned, don't pick a fight with the United States that you can't win. And you heard Samia Maktouf's complaining that too often the cases brought are against failed states or very weak states, not enough against the strong ones. So what do you do?
The prosecutor had to follow the law. Last week, everyone was happy because the prosecutor open request authorization to explore the possibility to investigate the Rohingya genocide. So that was, many people were happy. But if there are tortures in Afghanistan, have to investigate the torture in Afghanistan. And if the Taliban commit crimes, also have to investigate the Taliban crimes. Cannot select, cannot just prosecute enemies and protect friends. To be a justice system, you have to be not fearless and investigate the facts. That's for me the problem. The facts are clear. The U.S. Senate confirmed that the CIA could torture people in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a member of the ICC. That's it. So how to do it? For me, David Bosco's brilliant mind should be focused on how to advise the U.S. government a different policy to confront terrorism. That's what we need. We don't need the advice to the prosecutor. The prosecutor is doing her job. What is wrong is to torture people outside. That's a mistake. Killing people outside is a mistake. John McChrystal say in Afghanistan, there are 10 terrorists. You kill 2. How many remain? 20. 10 minus 2, 20. Why? Because the families and the friends became terrorists. You are multiplying terrorists with the war on terror. That, for me, is the wrong policy. So it's not about the ICC ignoring the torture crimes. It's about U.S. rethinking the strategy to deal with global terrorism. We need U.S. on board. We need U.S. following its tradition.
Luis Marinho Ocampo, let me put the question to you differently. You are, after all, the prosecutor who indicted Sudan's president, Omar al-Bashir. A decade on, we just saw him recently at that China-Africa summit in Beijing. He's still president. He's still in his job. Would you have done things differently now when you look back?
Yeah. President Bashir ordered a genocide. The mistake is not me. I investigate the crimes. 10 judges review my application. They conclude it's a genocide. Then the world did nothing. And that is not the problem of the ICC. It's the problem how the world is wrong organized. So that's the problem. U.S. instead to support the arrest warrant, use the arrest warrant against Mr. Bashir to obtain independence of the South and to get Sudan support on the war on terror. That's the problem. No judge in the world has a police. So judges in any country in the world have no police. The police are part of the government and follow the instruction of the judges. That's what we need in the world. If something happened in South America, in Europe, in Australia, police will do it. Yes, U.S. not. Yes, in Sudan, it's not a state party. Will not. So it's a process. But my job as a prosecutor was to investigate the crimes. And I found the crime of genocide was confirmed. In fact, U.S. also say it was a genocide. So that's what the court does. The court cannot be a court that protects friends or ignore powerful people who commit crimes. The court has to be fair and do it for everyone, to protect the people, the victims. That's the job of the court. And if the rest of the world ignore the victims, the court has to keep doing the same. Keep investigating crimes, keep exposing the crimes. That's what we need from the court.
Again, Chris Rudolph, I come back to what you said a short while ago. This what Luis Marinho Ocampo's reasoning is, if you follow it, is exactly what will perhaps get the court to go after cases that aren't just, for instance, in Africa, which is the complaint we hear a lot from the continent there.
Well, I think that actually motivates some of the recent behavior of the ICC and of its prosecutor trying to address that kind of legitimacy problem that has arisen. But I want to respond to what Mr. Ocampo said regarding Mr. Bashir and Sudan. Is that it's not to say that if you wanted to, it's not a question black and white of do we prosecute Bashir or genocide. It's a question of kind of the timing in which that's done that can be really important. So in that case, before the conflict was resolved, the ICC issued an arrest warrant for Bashir that it had really no capacity to execute. And in addition to that, alienated and angered a number of African states whose cooperation would have been perhaps very helpful in finding a solution that would eventually result in Mr. Bashir being removed from power and ultimately being tried. The way that the process was executed ultimately resulted in failure.
Sami Maktouf.
Yes, just to say that what the prosecutor Ocampo said was not clear and was not exactly what is happening. When we talk about President Bashir and saying that today we have to prosecute him, to sue him because we have charges. I would please just precise something said by the prosecutor Fatou Bensouda. She said recently that she has no longer means to investigate, and she has today not enough charges and not enough witnesses against Omar al-Bashir in order to prosecute him. So why the file is still open today? Is it not a political case again?
But she's saying it's a problem of resources there, which isn't the same thing as politics.
Maybe it is a question of
You're saying it's not a question of resources. You're saying it's a question of politics.
Also, we don't have enough witnesses saying, yes, I witnessed that Bashir said. So it's not a question, but it's not only a question of budget, but also a question of charges. Are the charges clearly made against this president or not? And for me, it's a way to say that this is, again, the failure of the ICC. The failure of ICC not to go ahead again, with the charges, with the budgets, with witnesses, and having almost the cases opened against African countries. This is a sign of the failure of ISIS. That's what I want. ICC, that's what I want to say.
Luis Marinho Ocampo.
Sorry, just to add a word, to be complete, please. What I'm saying, it was in the French news website Mediapart explaining and putting all the proof against this case. If you want to say a word on this Sudanese case.
Luis Marinho Ocampo.
Look, the case of President Bashir was reviewed in 2009 by 10 judges. A genocide arrest warrant was issued. A crimes against humanity was issued. And a war crimes is issued. It's there. It's pending. Should be arrested. Today, the discussion is about Afghanistan. The crimes were committed. The U.S. Senate confirmed that. Afghanistan is a third party. What we can do? Nuremberg was accused of victor justice, because the Nazis were defeated. They had no power. ICC is not about victor justice. ICC is a court of justice with no army behind. Therefore, the problem is ICC has to be absolutely correct on the facts and correct on the law. And as David Bosco said, in Afghanistan, Taliban commit crimes, Afghanistan Security Service commit crimes, and CIA commit crimes. And then ICC will propose to investigate the three of them. And that's the fact. So what is wrong with that? What is wrong is that U.S. can torture people outside, and it's fine. That for me is wrong. So that's why what we really need is to understand, okay, the facts are clear, ICC is doing its job, it's time to review the U.S. strategy in the war on terror. It's time to do it because it's not working well and it's producing torture, for instance.
We live in a funny time, David Lyndon Bosco, where there's more and more information about what goes on, both in terms of conflicts around the world, in terms of when you're chasing down crime, you can find out the facts a lot more easily than you used to be able to. Again, a more interdependent world, and yet the United States doesn't like multilateral solutions, international tribunals, not just tribunals. As Donald Trump bargains for a better three-way deal with Canada and Mexico, he's also leveled threats against the World Trade Organization, telling the Bloomberg News Agency if they don't shape up, I would withdraw from the WTO. David Lyndon Bosco, which way are we headed in terms of trying to find global solutions to problems like justice, saving the environment, trade?
Well, I think we're at a very difficult moment where there have been some major leaps forward in terms of international governance, particularly, obviously, after World War II, but then particularly after the end of the Cold War, there were some big steps that were taken, including the creation of the ICC. And many of these were important, but we're also seeing that there's a pushback in terms of people's questioning and feeling quite distant from many of these global institutions that then are going to impact their lives. And we've seen this dynamic with the European Union as well. And so leaving Bolton's exaggerations and many of his inaccurate statements aside, I do think there's a genuine issue here about the connection between global institutions and the internal affairs of states and what states have typically done for themselves. So I think that's a very difficult issue. The ICC, just to stay on the topic of the ICC, was a radical new departure, which was to create a global court that could go around the world and prosecute people, including senior officials, for this variety of crimes. So this was a very radical step. And what we're seeing now is the growing pains of trying to put that into practice. The question here is not, to my mind, about whether torture is right or wrong. It's about how do you implement a system of global justice in a way that is going to connect it adequately to political power and have it be effective. And I don't think at this stage of the ICC's existence that going after the United States is the right approach here. But I also understand the difficulties that the prosecutor faces. And maybe Luis Moreno-Ocampo is right that basically she had no choice here. But
Chris Rudolph,
there is an issue here that I think needs to be resolved by the
Let me ask just quickly, Chris Rudolph, because we're running short on time on this. The image that we had of the future when I was growing up was the TV show Star Trek, where there'd be international justice, where everybody would be together from all different nationalities. It's not happening, is it?
We should make it happen.
Yes, not like Star Trek, no. But I do think that a functional system is workable.
The American Revolution is also radical change.
Sense of practice, more so than pure idealism. So in this sense, I think you really, in the case of the ICC, I think among other things, it needs to foster a really strong relationship with the permanent members of the UN Security Council, and be very aware of kind of what the political ramifications of the choices that it makes are. In that sense, if those can work together, I think, like David Bosco mentioned, that's really the road ahead for international justice.
The
really
road ahead.
Combination of kind of this high idealism, these principles, but also facing some serious political realities.
All right, Luis Moreno-Ocampo, final word on this. You're going to have to factor in a dose of politics.
Look, as David Bosco say, ICC is a radical change. The American Revolution in the 18th century was a radical change. The French Revolution was a radical change. Yes, it's a moment to have a radical change. And that is a commitment of 120 states supporting the ICC. We need U.S. in the radical change. We need U.S. enforcing its commitment not to torture people outside. U.S. cannot be a global leader and say, I can torture people outside, not a problem, don't bother me. U.S. cannot do that. You need U.S. on board. You need U.S. exporting its values. That's what I'm missing here. Because basically, U.S. cannot justify they can torture and it's okay. That is wrong. And the ICC is there to say, I'm sorry, this is wrong.
Luis Marinho Ocampo, I want to thank you for joining us from Amsterdam. I want to thank as well Chris Rudolph for being with us from Alexandria, Virginia, David Linden Bosco from Bloomington, Indiana, Samia Maktouf. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.